the difference between biology and behavior. And there's a theory called biological determinism. And what biological determinism says, inherited traits influence culture, or we could say race influences culture. But that's not helpful, right? Because we've already defined race as being one human race. So I think we're talking more about ethnicity here. We're talking about differences in body types and regions, but there are obviously physical differences, even if they're superficial: hair color, eye color, skin color, body types. And the question is, does people's biology affect their culture? And here's a prompt question. I'm going to take a poll vote. So how many of you would agree with this statement? And I'm talking about America here. Blacks are better athletes than whites. Okay, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. How about you, Savannah? Yes, 6, 7. Okay, so I only can see like about 10 screens. And how many of you would say color of your skin or that sorts of genetics is not what affects whether or not you're a good athlete? And I got 4 or so on that. Okay, so how about if I change the question to are whites more intelligent than blacks? Okay, and there I get a universal no. So this is really curious, right? And it shows you the power of culture. We have been conditioned in American culture not to disparage races on things like intelligence, but it's okay to give a pass on things like athletic ability. But do you understand how both those statements are equally racist? Because it's making a value judgment or statement based on something like skin color. I mean, I didn't talk about muscle mass. I didn't talk about any other thing. We're basically just talking about a group of people. But you could go to sources, right? You could say, well, then how come even though African Americans only make up less than 13% of the general population, they dominate in sports like football, basketball, baseball, etc.? I mean, why is that if they're not superior athletes? And you would have to come up with different ideas or propositions. I mean, heavyweight boxing has been dominated by African Americans for decades, although that's beginning to change. The problem is, but see, I could do the same thing with, well, look at the vast majority of college professors are white. The vast majority of CEOs, CFOs, COOs are white. The vast majority of scientists are white. And you could use that to make a case to say, look, white people are smarter than black people. But there could be other explanations for why you see a disparity in the numbers. Just like in sports. What would be some other reasons you would see a disparity in the numbers of why you see African Americans seem to dominate in basketball? What would be another explanation besides they're simply genetically superior?
I would say like their experiences and how they grew up and the culture that they grew up in. Because I know for me, at least my black friends, like a lot of the like their expectations of their parents, especially when it comes to sports, is like they have a high standard when it comes to sports, you know, or like Asian parents when it comes to school, they have a high standard. So it's not necessarily that they're smarter or that they're more capable in that like they're just held to a higher standard, you know. So like I guess your experiences and the standard you've been held to as a kid. So your experiences and basically, yeah, that's what kind of shapes you. That's what I would say, honestly, you know.
Very good. Right. Or opportunity, right? Like most kids, even people living in urban centers or maybe not as having as much socioeconomic opportunities, there's usually at least a basketball court, right? But maybe not a pool. And you'll tend to find that most swimmers, water polo players, those sorts of things, white people dominate that. And once again, it simply could be because of opportunity. Those kids grew up with pools available where perhaps a lot of African American kids did not. And, and it doesn't mean, same with hockey, right? There perhaps aren't perhaps a lot of African Americans that have that sort of availability or living in circles where hockey is like this big deal. But things like basketball, football, baseball, there might be a lot more opportunity and a lot more, this is your chance, right? This is how you can make it. This is how you can have a better life. And you could imagine how much more you might invest into that if you knew college wasn't an option, opening up your own business wasn't an option. If it was, this is my ticket, this is where I want to put my energy and my resources. It also has to do with who you know, right? If you had a cousin or a brother or someone from your neighborhood who made a college or professional team, well, they're going to tell their coaches, hey, my homeboy, he's coming up. You might want to look into him and recruit from my school, recruit from my neighborhood. Same thing. If you're recruiting from a school, you're probably going to recruit people you knew, that you went to graduate school with, that you knew in a professional way. And that's why it's very important to give people, especially minorities or women or people who are not traditionally in certain fields, that opportunity, because it kind of like opens the door, not just for that person, but then for other people like them, because now they have a connection, now they have a bridge. And I think that's really important to realize how much culture influences things like that. So there's a lot of things you have to look into, but when you make these blanket assumptions, whether it's through physical athletic ability, intelligence, creativity, if you just start making these blanket racial judgments, that is classic racism, because you're not taking into account all these other individual criteria or circumstances that could have led to athletic ability, intelligence, creativity, whatever the criteria may be. So I just want you to be aware of that. Now to be fair though, say you're living in like a Swahili culture, or a culture where the people are judged on their physical beauty by the darkness of their skin, by the fullness of their lips, by the whiteness of their eyes, by the woolly texture of their hair, and they're tall and slender with beautiful teeth, and someone like me shows up into that tribe, some little short white bearded gnome, I'm probably not going to get a mate or be asked to join the beauty pageant, right? Because genetically my makeup is not matching what that culture sees as beautiful. But vice versa, if you came to my little mountain gnome community and saw the bearded men and women and you didn't fit into that physique, no matter how beautiful you appeared back in your homeland or country, you're probably not going to be a standout beauty in gnome land. And so I think there is some biological element. And so I'm not saying biological aspects don't influence culture, but I think you have to be careful not to over credit them.